Hi everyone, I'm John Hanlon with Destinations of History, joined again by Joshua, my brother and travel partner. And today we're talking about lodging and some interesting places that you may not think about and the different options you have when traveling, whether it's abroad or domestically or wherever it may be.
That's right. So we'll launch in here and talk about a few different styles of lodging depending on what type of traveler you are. So just to give an overview here, generally, a lot of this comes from our experience, particularly traveling throughout Europe. So that's kind of the experience that we talk from there. And so generally we look for something as centrally located as possible. And this is pretty important, and it can be difficult to find at times. So this helps if you're kind of booking things ahead of time as much as possible, give as much lead time as possible so that there are a lot of options available. That can really help because you want to try to find something centrally located so that preferably you can end up walking to a lot of places in kind of the downtown of wherever you're staying if that's possible. Always look into where it connects to public transportation. So no matter where you're staying, you want to see how close it is to subways or bus stops, or, even if it's just you're getting a taxi, however you get around, make sure that you kind of check into that and where it's located so you can see that if you can't walk to a place, how long is it going to take you to get there on public transportation? That's really important. And so if it's not centrally located, sometimes you can find something that's maybe a little more unique that might not necessarily be centrally located. So if you can find a really unique, kind of cool place to stay, that's always a plus as well. I think back when I was in Egypt a couple years ago, I stayed on a houseboat in Cairo on the Nile River there. And so that was a really unique experience in some place that was really cool to stay in, not just kind of your average, hotel or Airbnb type of place. So looking for someplace unique, or possibly look for someplace historical as well. So this particularly applies to a lot of hotels that can have some interesting historical connection. When I was in Vietnam, stayed near the Rex Hotel, which is a place where a lot of the journalists would gather during the Vietnam War. And there was a cafe there you could eat at, which is where a lot of government presentations and things would happen to the journalists. And so you kind of have that connection with some history as well. If you can find places like that, that's pretty cool. And all of that kind of takes some research. This is, lodging and finding good lodging, looking at reviews and where it's located can be some of the most time-intensive part of travel planning, but it's well worth it in the end when you go there and have a great experience staying at wherever you choose to stay. So with that said, as an overview, we'll launch into kind of three types of travel that I generally group places into, and we'll start with hotels, which are generally kind of the fanciest and most expensive places that you can stay. A lot of times these might be the least authentic options. You aren't staying with a local, and it's just kind of a nice room that you can stay in wherever you are. So it's generally going to be the most expensive. I know John and I have avoided hotels generally just because they are so much more expensive in a lot of places, particularly in Europe for sure, where hotels can be very expensive. So we generally avoid those for the second option, which is Airbnbs. And this to me is kind of the middle ground of lodging options as far as price and how nice it is. So a couple pros that it gives you a chance to stay with a local, which is always nice. They can give you tips on where you're staying and things like that, things to see. And then it is also cheaper. Those are the main pros of an Airbnb. And John, if you want to talk about some of the difficulties we've faced over the years as we've stayed in Airbnbs, some of the cons there.
Yeah, so we have stayed at many Airbnbs, both domestically here in the United States as well as in Europe. And they're great for the price, but you do have some downsides sometimes with an Airbnb. We've had problems, especially finding the Airbnbs. A lot of times we will arrive and we'll fly in at night, and then we're taking a train or a bus or walking to the Airbnb, and it's at night, and not always the best visibility, and it's really difficult to find because an Airbnb is a lot of times an apartment. If you're looking at the cheap ones, it's a room in somebody's apartment, and you're having to, in a foreign country, find the apartment number, find the apartment building, all of those details. So that may sound, if you've never experienced that may sound like it's a minor detail, but it's actually can be quite complicated. And we have sometimes just barely gotten by and been able to connect the phones to Wi-Fi and look up Google Maps or that type of thing to figure out where we're going. But there's a hassle there that you certainly do not get when you're going to a hotel that's much more established, much easier to find. Again, you're going to, with an Airbnb, if it's one of the cheaper ones, you're going to somebody's apartment. This is in local housing in an apartment building, that type of thing. So that's those downsides of Airbnbs are worth keeping in mind. A hotel is without a doubt the simpler, easier they're used to obviously having people go in and out versus you trying to make somebody's apartment work basically as a hotel room.
Yeah, another point to add to that is there's certain strange rules that people can have, especially when you're staying someplace outside the country, just different cultures, and you're dealing with a lot of different types of people. And so there are going to be different rules they have for their house or apartment or whatever it might be. So really paying close attention to that on the Airbnb listing and making sure you look at that closely to know all the rules ahead of time and understand kind of where you're headed to and what you're getting yourself into is really important. Also, just make sure if you have any questions, message the host. It's super simple to send a message over Airbnb and do it that way and just clear up any issues that might be, particularly say you're driving somewhere. Well, is there parking? If you have laundry, then, is there a washer and dryer, that type of thing. So all those types of questions you want to make sure you clear up for these important issues that could come up while you're staying at the place.
Yeah, and I think also some other things to play into it is, if you're traveling with kids or whether you're by yourself, there are a lot of different aspects to it as well. And if you're talking about booking lodging for once in a lifetime type trip or twice in a lifetime type trip, say you're an American going to Europe, you may not want to look at Airbnbs because they're not going to be worth the hassle. You're not, this is not something you're doing constantly. Like we travel half of the year, so we're saving a lot of money by using Airbnbs over hotels. If you're talking about a very rare trip to Europe or to another foreign country, you're probably going to want to look at hotels. They're just going to be so much simpler. Some of them include breakfast. You're going to have all of the amenities you're used to, a better bed, more beds, whatever the case may be. You might want to steer clear of Airbnbs. You do get a more authentic experience because you're literally staying exactly where the locals stay in a house, in an apartment, that type of thing. But really, if you're looking at convenience, and there's of course, even if Airbnb is cheaper, there is something to be said for paying more for that convenience of a hotel. So just something to keep in mind. It depends on how often you're traveling, how long your stay is there, how much money you can save. But that's worth considering. Is that Airbnb is a great option to save money, but it's not always the best option.
Right, exactly. And then the third option that I kind of view is, I think the cheapest and maybe least fancy of all the lodging options are hostels. And this is not something that we have done much of in our travels, but are certainly familiar with how they work and have talked to people who stay in hostels. I think price is the number one thing here. So even cheaper than Airbnb's, hostels will generally be about your cheapest option wherever you're traveling. And the reason for that is you're generally staying with other people. And so you've got that downside, which can also be a pro if you want to meet other travelers and meet other people that are, kind of in your same situation of visiting wherever it is for the first time or maybe just passing through. And so it's a great way to kind of meet other people, other travelers, and get to have some of that human interaction that it can be lost out on a lot of times especially if you're traveling by yourself. You kind of just launch yourself into some new city and can be overwhelming. So if you are able to have those interactions, that can be really helpful. So hostels are the cheapest way to go, but you also have to be willing to maybe stay with some other people. There's maybe, several people in the same room type of situation. But if you're willing to do that, that can be a really cheap option as well. So then just to finish out for us, a few website suggestions. As far as hotel goes, Trivago.com is a really good one that searches a whole bunch of different hotel sites and finds a lot of good deals. So I found that's helpful. There's a lot of good reviews on there for hotels. And then there's also just a lot of, you can customize searches really easily and are able to find a lot of good things as far as stuff like how far is it from the city center and options like that. Then Airbnb.com is obviously where you book an Airbnb. So that's where you're going to want to search on there for any options. And Airbnb has actually expanded recently beyond just homes into things like experiences, is I believe what they call it, where local hosts will give tours, they'll give kind of dinner experiences, all sorts of different things like that. So beyond just simple lodging, you can get that through Airbnb now as well, and that's all through Airbnb.com. Then for hostels, hostelworld.com is a great site that has tons of hostels all over the world, as well as reviews and people's experiences there and prices. So if you're looking to stay in a hostel and looking for those cheapest options, that's a really good way to do that. And we'll have links in the description to this video to all these websites that I mentioned, so you can check those out. But overall, just let us know in the comments kind of the coolest place that you've ever stayed while traveling, and maybe any other tips you have for travel lodging, or things you've picked up over the years as you've traveled. We always love to hear from you, and this is always a learning experience for us as well. I think no matter how much you travel, you're always learning and gaining more experiences with it. So hopefully you got some new tips from this video though.